Imagine growing up in a picturesque Swiss village surrounded by rolling hills and morning stillness. A paradise on the outside. But inside your home, you're constantly walking on eggshells, navigating the unpredictable storms of a raging father. And then fast forward decades, and you find yourself thousands of miles away, still feeling trapped by another person in a different situation. This was Cendrine Hosoda's reality. Welcome to This Your Story to Tell. I'm your host, Megan Babcock, and today I'm honored to have you here with me to share your incredible story of resilience, clarity, and empowerment. Welcome.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Well, I'm looking forward to allowing our audience to get to know you a little bit. So, if you want to just start out your story as you were growing up in this very idyllic environment, how was it really for you in life?
Yeah, you're thinking Switzerland and like quaint little village, and I got to hang out with farmers' kids that had animals, and so on the outside it really did look perfect, but behind closed doors it was a different story. I had a dad who he was not in control of his emotions, and there weren't really labels for it back then. My mom tried to give names and things, but basically the message she gave me is he's just sick and you just have to, accept what is. And so I learned how to make the best of having a father that was there and not there. And that was like the only time you got attention was either when you did something imperfectly in form of punishment, or like marginal praise if you were actually hitting the perfection mark. I had 3 siblings and we were all trying to excel to get some form of validation and affirmation. And so there was no winning because we're all in competition with each other. So it was constant striving growing up and constant looking for landmines and avoiding them like the pest, because it was self-protection mode, hypervigilance to the max. And so growing up was really not as idyllic as it looked on the outside. We all learned to live a double life because my father was also a highly respected elder in the church. But at home, it was a whole different story. And it was a miracle. Like my siblings saw the hypocrisy, and thankfully, I was able to see, well, he's not representing God the way he really is. God is like, we're not talking about the same person here. So I was able to get some refuge, having that belief, that understanding that God is actually who he says he is in the Bible, not who my dad represents him to be. And so I had a little bit of refuge there that my siblings didn't have, which helped me sort of like be a little bit more self-reliant, self-sufficient. Whereas my siblings, they all kind of struggled more, and my mom spent all of her time trying to help them. And so I fell through the cracks. None of my needs got noticed. And I believed, you're just better off not having or communicating needs, or trying to find a way to solve them yourself. And so, yeah, those were my sort of like belief systems getting into the world, is that I can only depend on myself. And I have to like excel at everything and make the best of whatever comes at me. And that was the rhyme and reason to life and how to master it. At the time, I was highly dissociated. I had no idea I was dissociated, but clearly if you don't get validated, you're just like shutting that down. And so it took a long time to even recognize that I had done that.
Yeah, well, when you grow up in something, it becomes normal in a lot of ways. This is just how life is. This is the coping mechanisms that I have to engage with in order to survive. And other people weren't there meeting your needs. You're attempting to meet your needs while not very effective for the long term. Your brain is doing its best in that moment to keep you safe and able to continue moving forward and functioning. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize, that we often don't even recognize how things from our childhood create beliefs, values, narratives that when they are not explored, you just keep acting those things out. At least that was kind of my story. I told you before we were going to get started, there were some things there that were similarities in our story. I talk about in the first episode that I ever did with It's Your Story to Tell that I didn't realize it in the moment, but there was a moment with my grandparents. And I was very close to my grandparents, but my grandpa had anger issues. He was a Marine and he had grown up in a difficult time, and his mom had passed away. He had a really difficult stepmom. He lied about his age to get into the military. So, life's not good if you want to get out of it at a younger age and get into the military. He had trauma that was creating these patterns, and just probably like your dad too. Not that we excuse bad ways of interacting with other people, because abuse is wrong. But he didn't know how to cope.
Yeah.
His pain and hurt creates a coping mechanism in you. While it's different, it may not have been as effective. I know mine wasn't, because I too decided that sharing emotions was not safe, because he was getting upset with me when I was being emotional about a sad movie. But it was really because it triggered in him his inadequacy and feelings that he had hurt me and he was disappointed. And my grandma had helped me understand how much he loved me, but that's how he was responding. And so there were a couple things that happened in that. I didn't want people to get upset by my own feelings, so let me not share those. And then the other is I saw this person who I loved very much, who my grandma said loved me very much, responding in anger and passion. And it actually ended up causing me to find myself in relationships that were not very healthy for myself later on in life.
Yeah.
So you had this upbringing. You ended up in another situation miles away with a totally different person that looked totally different. So tell me about that, and how do you even kind of relate how you ended up in that situation?
Yeah. So I ended up getting married and moving to the States. And my husband was nothing like, on the outside, he seemed nothing like my dad. He was soft spoken. He was saying all the right things. He sounded like he was emotionally intelligent, but I only found out later that the words did not match the actions and the reality. But so for me, it was like I was being grateful that I was no longer having to worry about getting punished. I was no longer having to worry about getting yelled at for no reason. And all of those overtly abusive traits. And yet I was in this marriage and I was just feeling something's not right. And because also in the Christian circles, you're told to you just sacrifice more, you just do more and deny yourself and all of the things. And so that's what I was doing. I was good at long distance trekking with, all of I'm just going to power through this. And so it never occurred to me that there was such a thing as overt abuse and neglect and all of those kinds of patterns that come with that. I was familiar with the more explosive kind. And so it's like I was a little embarrassed when I finally came to and realized what I was actually dealing with in my 40s. Like, how did it take me so long to realize that? And then part of my healing journey was to actually have compassion on that and say, well, you thought it was this and you never knew. So I eventually came across a book by somebody who spelled out all the different forms and all the different patterns that covert abuse can take. And it felt like she was telling me what my life was like. And I'm like, that's what I'm experiencing. You mean there's a name for that? You mean that's a thing? And so it was very healing for me to actually have a word for it. I know people are all big about not labeling anybody, and I'm not using it as a judgment. It's just like a stand in place sort of word to to say, this is why I was
Experienced.
falling apart, So, yeah.
Right.
So it was like, okay. So I went from the clearly explosive outward to the very sort of hidden. And in the process, I completely had my own reality denied, and I stopped trusting my intuition, and I thought I was just off on everything. And when I finally saw those descriptions and started seeing the patterns as opposed to just random, events, I started like, oh, so I wasn't crazy. I was not wrong about that. And that was really, really helpful for me to kind of
Yeah, it was
awaken to that.
probably helping you when you, for a long time, have discredited your intuition and kind of dismissed and questioned yourself. It's validating to
Yeah.
say, wow, this exists. I now have words for it. And being able to realize that you weren't crazy and give you your voice back
Mm-hmm.
and allow you to start building trust in yourself and your
Yes,
intuition
exactly.
again. So
Mm-hmm.
were you in your marriage while you were figuring this out? Or did you start this after, or are you still married to the same
I'm
person?
separated. Yeah.
Okay.
I was still married at the time, and I discovered this book while we were all still in the same household. And that book, actually, I ended up joining a support group with other women who were experiencing the same thing. And that's where they were actually helping us gain safety and stability before making crazy decisions. And so I knew that there were options. And I was very scared of all the options. I just wanted things to be fixed, and we literally did a lot of different things, including one-on-one workshops and intense counseling intensives and so many different things, including with some counselors that just piled on the secondary abuse because it was all my fault. And
Oh
it
no.
was all good because it helped me develop confidence in me saying, hey, this is not okay with me. And that's not angry. You're not seeing my side, and I'm going to stand up and advocate for myself. So that was all helpful. And I knew I can't move forward with anything like with ultimatums of any kind unless I feel like God is giving me that peace. And so I just kind of kept working on myself until like one day I just suddenly something had happened that gave me these big like ahas. And then I'm like, yep, it's time. It was scary because this was me learning how to set boundaries and find ways to enforce them, because growing up, I couldn't set a boundary that was going to be respected. And so to me, it felt like, well, why bother giving boundaries? Nobody's going to respect them. And then I learned through this group, actually boundaries work because you have a backup plan.
Right, because boundaries are not for the other person, right?
Exactly.
Boundaries are for yourself. And
Yes.
so you can enforce the boundary because it's could be you have to remove yourself from a situation
Mm-hmm.
versus
Mm-hmm.
they have to do something.
Yeah. So what I ended up doing is I asked him to move out, and I was fully aware that he might not cooperate
Right?
because I figured, what am I going to do if he says no? And so I went through all of the background work to figure out, well, how can I get myself a little cushion financially, and where could I crash land if something doesn't open right away? And so that actually really strengthened me too. And I had all of that in place. And so then when I came in and said, I would like it if you would move out and we would, you know, try to heal separately so that we don't trigger each other all the time. Um,
Mm.
then it was like, okay, so if he says no now, I'm not going to feel defeated. I'm actually, okay, well, then I'm going to start putting things in place and I'll be the one moving out. That felt extremely empowering. And thankfully, I
Yeah.
didn't have to do it. He did end up
Oh,
moving out.
good.
And that felt good because it felt like, well, that's how it should be, honestly, in terms of if you're going to look at like, you know, who's responsible for undermining what we've been trying to do. And that
Mm-hmm.
was clearly him. He even admitted it. He just never did anything about it. And so it felt good. felt good to say, you know what, it'd be better if you moved out.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so powerful. A very powerful moment in my own journey. I grew up in a religious home. I love Jesus. I too have participated in all kinds of different things, including workshops and such within the church. And there was also wounding from just not understanding how
Yeah.
to really come alongside people in those scenarios. And it's so complicated and so hard. So there is no judgment or blame there. It was just that was my
Yeah.
experience. And I was coming home from one of my groups that I was in, and I remember being so angry with God. And it was interesting because in my growing up, anger was not an accepted emotion. You couldn't really have that voice or express it. My dad was very calm and passive because of what he experienced. It was kind of the opposite, right, from his dad.
Mm.
And we didn't learn how to even effectively express emotions.
Yeah.
And I thought anger was disrespect. And how could you ever question God? But in this moment, I was learning how to be vulnerable and be authentic. And I just was like letting God have it. And I'm like, am I going to get struck down? Like, what's going to happen? Because I can't believe I just did that. And it was so beautiful because I heard him speak to me with such kindness.
Yeah.
And he allowed me to see that he was not an abusive God, which, if I'm honest, because of the way I grew up and the way rules were, it was perfection. All of these negative consequences, you did it to yourself kind of thought process in my mind. But at the same moment, he allowed me to see how I was responding to the things in my relationship with my husband were also not healthy, and how I was probably more on that covert side of codependency and trying to, walk around on eggshells and try to make things perfect so that we wouldn't have things explode. What he showed me was what you're doing is abusive too, because abuse is just taking away someone's free will. And if you're not honest, if you're not having boundaries, if you're not being true to yourself, then you aren't giving that person the opportunity to make a choice for themselves on
Mm-hmm.
how they want to engage with you. It was a very big conversation, but it was also a very correcting
Yeah.
conversation for me, where
Yeah.
God really highlighted how we all bring these things into our relationships from
Mm-hmm.
our past,
Yep.
and how when we don't look at those things and patterns from our childhood, they don't even have to be abusive.
Yeah.
They could be narratives that aren't serving you, but they
Mm-hmm.
have created these dysfunctional ways of interacting with people. So, as we're closing, where are you right now? Are you guys doing your own work?
Yeah. So technically, I just asked for a legal separation because I had laid down any expectation that he would actually do his fair share of the work. But then he's the one who said, no, I want a therapeutic separation. Although we were doing mediation at first, and it was like I had expected. He's going through the motions and he's not actually making changes. And so I was kind of advocating for myself in that too, and saying, I feel like it's be better if you really do go on your own journey. You decide for yourself if you want to do something or not, because just jumping through the hoops is not how we're going to get back. And that felt good. So we're in our 5th year of separation.
Wow.
And
Okay.
it's like I've made peace with the outcome, and I'm just thankful that I've had this time to go, first of all, go to a good trauma counselor myself. And then that's how I ended up getting into trauma informed life consulting school, where I've been training for 3 years. And it's so cool because they make you dig into every single day. You have to do your own work and go to all the places you don't want to go and do all the things. And it has been so rewarding for me because it's been even more powerful than counseling, because it's like this total immersion kind of thing. And then starting to see clients and being able to implement what you've known works for you, because you actually tried it on yourself. You were your own guinea pig kind of thing, And I have definitely been able to look at all the gifts that God has brought out of this very devastating situation, because I'm smiling and everything now, but there were moments I didn't really care if COVID was going to take me or not. Let's just be honest, So it's not like it was light, or like I was no longer so dissociated that I wasn't connected to the pain. And that was like opening Pandora's box and not being able to close it. And then you just have to learn to sit with yourself through the pain. And those were all valuable skills to learn, even though they were hard. And it's so rewarding because of how I can now do it with my clients in that way. Regardless of where things are going or not going, I have found myself, and I'm like unapologetically me again. And that feels good. Yeah.
That's so amazing. I'm so thankful for you and your willingness to share. I can't wait to have you back in this next episode where we'll dig into a little bit more of the work that you did and how you are using your story to make a difference. Thank you, listeners, for joining us on this heartfelt exploration of resilience and freedom. Cendrine's story reminds us of the power of clarity and self-advocacy. Next time, we're going to dive into how these experiences shaped her mission to help others heal holistically. Don't forget to share this episode and subscribe to It's Your Story to Tell to catch more inspiring journeys.